The other day, I was volunteering in my youngest child's classroom. He's a third grader, and I was helping with some of the other students. One little girl kept messing up the words that either started or ended with a lowercase b or d. I started trying to teach her my trick for remembering which was which, and I drew a little picture of a lowercase b made from a bat and a ball. The bat comes before the ball. She said, "Yeah, I learned that one. I also learned that B has a belly and D has a diaper." Then she showed me the bed trick where you make a B with your left hand and a D with your right, and together they make a bed. Clearly, she had been taught many times how to tell the difference between a B and a D, but obviously it wasn't solving the problem because she was still mixing them up when she was reading. So as soon as I left the classroom, I headed home to do some research. I thought maybe some of my listeners might be having some of the same problem with their kids at home. Hello, I'm your host, Miriam Brown. In addition to my teaching certificate, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in curriculum and instruction. I spent the last decade as a public school teacher, and I want to give you insider tips on how to help your child do well in public school. Today, let's talk about how to solve the very common problem of B and D reversals. Often, when I talk to parents about dyslexia, they bring up seeing things backwards or mixing up the letters B as in Bravo and D as in Delta. However, the relationship between dyslexia and B and D reversal is a bit more complicated. Some kids with dyslexia don't have problems with B and D, and some kids that do tend to reverse those letters don't have dyslexia. In fact, it makes sense that it would be hard for any kid to distinguish between these letters. Lowercase b and lowercase d are the exact same shape. They're just facing different directions. In fact, P and Q are also the same shape as B and D. They're just pointing down instead of up. But somehow, kids have an easier time with up and down directionality than left and right. Most kids will be able to tell the difference between B and D with practice, though. So, when do you start to worry about it? According to understood.org, a really helpful dyslexia website that I reference a lot, most kids will grow out of reversing B and D by the end of second grade or at the age of 7. If, after that, they're still struggling, you should talk to their teacher and see where they are in their reading development. But be warned, teachers are often a very positive bunch, and they might not feel comfortable telling you that your kid is behind. They would rather tell you how sweet the child is and how well they're doing in some other areas. This might be because they really do care about your child and want to see the best in them. And it might also defy cultural norms for someone to tell you negative things about your child. If it were me, though, I would not listen to any hopeful comments they add to soften the blow, like, "They're making progress and I think they'll grow out of it." While it might be true that some kids are late bloomers, the research shows that the earlier you get help for your child, the more successful the treatment will be. There is a definite downside to waiting to see if they will improve over time. So if they're still struggling to distinguish letters by the end of second grade, you might consider getting them tested to find out what's going on. So, even though you don't have to worry until the end of second grade, it's a good idea to start working on it as soon as you notice the problem. Kids as young as 4 and 5 can practice distinguishing between B and D. So, how do you help your child learn this tricky skill? After I talked to the little girl in my son's third grade class, I came home to scour the internet and see what I could find. There are a lot of tricks on YouTube and various websites, but I couldn't find a lot of research about which way was the most effective. However, I had an aha moment when I read an article by the NOCO Dyslexia Center. This article pointed out that all of the tricks we use to teach don't really solve the problem of directionality. A student might know that D wears a diaper and B has a belly, but which way is the baby with the diaper facing? Because B could have a diaper too. When a student with dyslexia makes a B with their left hand and a D with their right to form the bed, they might think that the letter they're making with their right comes first and get all confused. So, what do? The article said that the best thing to do is to overteach or spend a massive amount of time teaching only one of the letters. If you teach the B and they get really good at figuring out the B, then by default they'll know what the D is. When I read this, a long forgotten phrase from my childhood bubbled up. I could almost hear my voice saying, "If it's not a B, then it's a D." I struggled with reading as a child. I was pulled out of class for one-on-one remediation every day until third grade. I remember that B and D were hard for me, and the tricks people tried to teach me were really confusing. Eventually, I decided just to focus on one letter. Maybe some teacher taught me this. I can't remember. But I worked hard on learning B, and then if I got confused, I would ask, is it a B? If it wasn't, then I would say to myself, if it's not a B, it is a D. I remember doing this for a few years, and it slowed my reading down, but I was much more accurate. Now I've practiced reading for so many years that I don't even think about it anymore. But I remember being just as frustrated as the little girl in Yogi's class when someone tried to help me with yet another unhelpful mnemonic device. So here's what I suggest. Help your child learn the letter B as in boy. Don't worry about D, they can figure that out by default. I chose B instead of D because research found that children were more likely to make errors with left-facing letters like D and J than right-facing ones. They hypothesized that this was because most letters in our alphabet faced right, and children implicitly learn that this is most often the correct way for letters to face. So I say, start with the easy one. Help them feel confident about identifying the right-facing B. If you want to start with D, I can't stop you. You will need to teach way more than you think you need to. This is called overteaching, and it's really effective. In education, we have a saying, telling isn't teaching. Often, we think that if we told a person once, or even 1,000 times, they should be able to get it, but that's not always the case. It really helps to come at the problem from many different directions. There really are no visual learners or auditory learners. Everyone learns best with activities. So here are some multisensory learning ideas. We're going to use some of the same strategies that we talked about with teaching in the first season. I actually do use a mnemonic device. I like this baseball one because it has alliteration with the sound B. When making a B, the bat comes before the ball. Can you hear all the B sounds? When your child says this little phrase, it will help them incorporate their verbal and auditory centers of their brain. You can find a picture of this bat that comes before the ball by Googling "the bat comes before the ball." There's also a lady on Teachers Pay Teachers who has posters and stickers of the bat and the ball. Her store is called Engage and Inspire with Mrs. Sneider. Looking at the picture often will help your child use the visual centers in their brain to remember. I did a very ill-advised thing in order to make an awesome visual aid for the kids I was reading with. Don't tell my husband, but I got a block of wood. Then I used my whittling kit to carve a bat out of some craft wood. And then I was going to attach that to the block with magnets so that the kids could take it on and off. I thought it would be really cool to attach an actual baseball to it, too. I bought a ball at Walmart and then I tried to cut it, but those stupid baseballs are made out of sturdy stuff. I got the leather cut, but inside it was filled with this hard, crumbly stuff, so I decided to put it on the table saw to cut it. I nearly cut my finger off while trying to hold it steady. I was embarrassed and scared after the ball went flying, so I ran out of the garage with the half of the baseball that I could still find, and I hid in my closet. Then I felt silly. I'm an adult. I can make stupid decisions if I want to. So I stood up and calmly went to the kitchen and used my glue gun to attach the ball to a round piece of wood. Why didn't I just paint the round piece of wood to look like the ball? But then I realized how ridiculous my visual aid was. Why was I going to so much trouble? I get these crazy ideas in my head and then I go all out on them. So I have that silly B block hiding under my bed till I'm ready to admit to myself that I'm nuts. Now, obviously, your child might wonder about directionality. Does before mean they put the bat on the right side or the left? Just remind them gently that they read from left to right. So when reading, the bat will come first on the left side. Then the ball will be on its right side. Keep practicing until they get it. Another cool idea I found on the internet was about color coding the letters. Since we're only focusing on one letter, you could have a page of text and have your child use highlighter to mark all the B's. Highlighters are fun and much safer than table saws. Another great idea is to use the sense of touch. You could make a letter B out of sandpaper for them to trace with their fingers. You can also help them form a letter B on paper or on the sidewalk with chalk. The more they write the letter B correctly, the more easily they will be able to read it. There's something about making the letter that helps us recognize it. You want to involve as many different parts of their brain as possible. You can involve the parts of our brain that control their fine motor skills with handwriting. You can help them make a B with their hand as well, but you'll need to make sure they only do it with their left hand. Can they tell their left hand from their right hand? I used to have a freckle on my hand that told me which one was my right hand. When it faded, I had to remind myself that I write with my right hand. I do remember forming a B with my left hand to remind myself how to write a letter with my right hand. It's kind of hard to do both of those things at the same time. You can also involve the parts of their brain that control our large motor skills by having them do skywriting. If they're right-handed, they'll have to cross their body to make the bat. If they're left-handed, they won't, but it will be good for them to feel and notice how they write a B in the air. Or maybe you could make a lowercase b that takes up the whole driveway and they could run around it. Again, you'll need to talk with them about direction and which direction the bee is facing. Because if they go to the other side of the driveway and look at the bee upside down, it would look like a lowercase q. But the more they start thinking about the direction, the better. One of my favorite ways is to make cookies. You can make bee cookies and talk about which direction to put them. When I make cookies like this, I like to roll out snakes from the dough and have the child form the bee out of the dough snakes. The cookies facing up should be a B when they're cooked, but upside down they would look like a D, so make sure to only frost the B side. I know that these are all activities that I talked about in my first season, but they are tried and true and fun ways to learn stuff. So now you know that it is really normal for young children to have problems with letter reversals, especially B and D. It's no cause for concern at first, but it is a good idea to start working on it as soon as you notice the problem. Use the technique of going overboard teaching the concept. This is called overteaching. As long as you do it safely and have fun with it, it'll be great. Even if your child does have a learning disability, they will get better with practice. Our brains can change. If your child is still struggling with it after second grade, though, make sure and go get them tested by an educational psychologist or a speech-language pathologist. The earlier they get help, the better. Let me know if you have any other ideas that worked for your child by commenting on my website, publicschoolsuccess.com. That's all one word, publicschoolsuccess.com. But for now, it's time to put down your phone and go read with your child.